Welcome to Seven Trumpets Prepper. And in this scripture discussion, guys, I'm going to go over something that is a very touchy subject, and that's adultery. A subscriber emailed me and requested me to answer this question for the lady. And I hope I give an honest answer from Scripture, because what I'm going to go over is not my own thoughts. It is from what I've gleaned from Scripture from the time I was a child forward, because it's a very important subject to me, because whenever I first went to get married to my wife, I wanted to make sure that, number one, that was the one and only person I ever wanted to be with, and number two is that that was said and done when it's done, because Scripture is very plain about adultery. I mean, it's not one of those things that there's any gray area on. You know, I'll say this and then I'll go right into the study. If there's three things in our last generation that I think that is so far out of hand and is so gray area for most of society, and it shouldn't be, is pornography, adultery, and homosexuality. I mean, the Scripture is so plain on those things, and everybody tries to be like out in the gray area about it. And ladies and gentlemen, it's just really cut and dried. If you ascribe to the beliefs of Scripture, you really can't ride the fence with that one. Okay, so anyway, in the future videos, we're going to touch on pornography, because most people don't know. If you want to go ahead and study ahead of time, the Greek word porneia, you can guess where pornography comes from, just like I've told people all the time with essential oils, is pharmakia. That's where we get pharmaceuticals from, pharmacy from today. And homosexuality, we'll definitely get on that in another topic day. Anyway, adultery. It's something that plagues our society. Polygamy, practice very openly in Scripture. There's a difference between that and sleeping with another man's wife. And polygamy, that's a whole other subject for another day as well. To begin with, if you would like to go to the link provided in the video description below, I actually found this to be the best thing for us to use for this Scripture discussion, because first you can go over this in full context, and then you can go to the Scripture for even more full context off of this guide. And very useful. And you can go to openbible.info/topics/adultery. It's got a huge compound list, just sucked all of the info that just about possibly even I can think of out of the Scripture and put onto paper so that you can understand it. Now, this is from the ESV version, so whenever I read throughout it, as it would say the G word, I'm going to say Elohim. Obviously, most people would much rather prefer using the KJV or the Hallelujah Scriptures, but for the subject matter at hand, I think this will be okay today, in my opinion, and you can go back over it with your Hallelujah Scriptures. Anyway, to begin with, Proverbs 6:32 to get this fired off. He who commits adultery lacks sense. He who does it destroys himself. It's something that plagues our generation, and I mean, it's what we're doing, is destroying ourselves, because at the end of the day, not only are you sinning against the Most High, not only are you sinning against yourself, but you're actually destroying your being, because when you join yourself with your spouse, you are becoming one flesh. It's something that people don't think about. I mean, there's a study done, and then we'll continue the Scripture. Just so many thoughts coming to my mind all at once that we're probably going to be all over the place this study today. But there was a study done showing that a woman actually carries DNA from every sexual male partner that she's ever been with throughout her lifetime. She continues to carry a portion of that DNA has been synthesized into her DNA. It's interesting stuff. I mean, our DNA, that's a study I cannot wait to do, is life is in the blood. That's going to be a wonderful study. But anyway, moving forward. But I say to you, that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Matthew 5:28 is one that strikes home to me all the time, because if I so much as see another beautiful woman, the moment that the thought says, hey, let's check this out, it goes into my mind. Probably don't want to do that, because number one, if you get thoughts of fornication in your heart, that's one thing. But if she so much as you couldn't tell from a distance, you start to have unclean thoughts. Well, if she has a wedding band, she's married to another man, or she don't even have a wedding band, she's a married woman. There's that opens the gateways to sin. Furthermore, moving on, Hebrews 13:4, let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. And I count myself as a person unworthy of the kingdom all the time, because I am a sinner. I've had hateful thoughts toward other people. I've had lustful thoughts. I've cursed at times. We've all fell short, and Hebrews 13:4 is a very good one. And I'm not going to go through every single one of these. I'm going to actually get into the context of this here in a minute, and we're going to begin that with right here at Exodus 20:14. Plainly says, "You shall not commit adultery." Now, we're going to find here in Scripture in a minute what is exactly defined out as adultery, because now that right there is the baseline for don't do this. So we're going to get on into that in a minute. But there's some scripture I want to read along the way. 1 Corinthians 6:18, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. I mean, it's deep stuff, people, because you're not just doing a sin. It's just like with the issue, like if a person's addressing homosexuality, is you're joining your flesh with another person. You're uniting your being with another being, and that is, where with homosexuality it's an abomination. With adultery, you're actually destroying the bond that two other people have. You're actually destroying that one fleshness between those two, because you're joining with one of the other persons. It's deep. I mean, it's deep stuff when you really get to thinking about it on a level beyond just saying, well, it's wrong. It's the effect pattern that's so far beyond there. Here and right here goes into Deuteronomy 22:22. And this is way back, in the days of the law, whenever it was people really looked to it, and instead of just trying to whisk it away these days. If a man is found lying with the wife of another man, both of them shall die. That's one way of keeping people straight. The man who lay with the woman, and the woman, so you shall purge the evil from Israel. I mean, it does take two to tango. And, it's not a one-sided street. Both parties had to consent to that. There's no victim in that matter. Most often, 90-something% of the time, you're going to find that both of them intended to do it. Luke 16:18, everyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. Now we're getting it defined from Scripture right here. And he who marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery. So right there you go. Now, Scripture says that, Messiah spoke on that all sins can be forgiven except that of blasphemy against the Ruach HaKodesh. Just want to clarify this. But nevertheless, adultery is still sin. John 8:4-11 says, they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now here's somebody in the very act, still being further defined. Now in the law Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say? This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. And Yahushua bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. And I agree that it's not what I constantly tell people is we need not look at the past. What we need to be focused on is the future. If we continue to sin and sin and sin after the knowledge of the truth, my greatest fear is that a person will be cut off. The Most High warns that. We've already addressed that in previous scripture discussion. And, the point we should be going after every day is refining our lives to the point where we don't go back to that. And adultery is something that even if it's done once, it never should be done again. I mean, that's something that definitely needs to be put away and don't go back to. Anyway, moving forward, it says, "But I say to you," it's Matthew 5:32. If you're following along with the same sheet, it says, "But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery." So, two people should try to be reconciled to one another after they're married. There's not just, "I'm mad at you, I'm done with you," just like our society's doing today. The wife, husband, either party. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So there you go. The scenario that a wife's tired of her husband, she decides, you know what, I'm over this, I'm just going to go get a divorce, marry somebody else. Scripture says right there that that's committing adultery. The husband obviously is not in the wrong there, but the wife has most certainly put herself in the wrong, and then the person that ends up marrying her has put themselves in the wrong as well. Now, right here, Matthew 5:27-28. "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery,' but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Just some of these I want to hit, and a lot of them are a recurring theme, but it's just good to have those multiple witnesses from multiple books in the Bible, especially when Messiah says something multiple times. There's a record of that, so it's not just like somebody inserted something. It's not just like you can take it out of context. These are very direct quotes. I mean, there's no beating around the bush about it, like I said earlier. 1 Corinthians 7:1-40. "Now concerning the matters above which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, but because of the temptation of sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." And, the fruits of the Spirit talks about self-control. It's temperance. It's something we all need to work on. And with that said, a lot of marriages, what happens, why it falls off the rails, is one of the partners will not fool with the other partner. It's like, "I ain't got time for you," or, "I got so many other things going on." And eventually, the human nature, the heart desires what the heart desires. And if it's not found at home, then it goes looking for it elsewhere, and that's where sin begins. And, if you're going to marry somebody, you need to be committed to that person. That's why, adultery, when you start looking at it, the very epitome of it is not keeping the marriage cell together. It's not the act within itself. It's the beginning of it starts right there, is not trying to hold the marriage together. Because then when people start feeling that emptiness, then they start going elsewhere. And not only that, but people start trying to infuse themselves into a marriage, in between someone's marriage, and all that usually does not end well. Romans 7:3. "Accordingly, she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is alive. But if her husband dies, she is free from the law, and if she marries another man, she is not an adulteress." Now, this is interesting scripture right here, because this right here plainly says that, say the scenario plays out that a man and wife get a divorce. Her husband passed away. She wants to marry again, she can marry again. It's important that a man understands that it's not all right just to go throw your wife away and go marry another. There is a way that we're supposed to conduct ourselves, and Scripture gives plain guidelines in here how that husbands and wives are supposed to treat each other, and it just continues to get more in depth here. If you read all these, you should have no questions at the end of the day. There's too much knowledge on this. Ephesians 5:5, "For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure, or who is covetous, that is an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Messiah and Elohim." Very important to understand right there, sexual immorality is something that plagues our last generation. We have it inundated in our face. Every TV show comes on is actually just about like an X-rated movie anymore. I mean, you don't even need to. I don't even know why people even bother watching porn. You can just turn on the regular TV and see just about whatever you want to. Not that I'm encouraging that, I'm just saying that's how inundated with our society. So sexual immorality is just deep within our society. In the last generation, I have to turn away from it because, I mean, it's everywhere. Revelation 21:8, but as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. So there you go. Don't fall into that lump. Alright, moving on here. On over, you'll find Galatians 5:21. Envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. And we'll get further into this later on in study on pornea, or porn. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of Elohim. Alright? In Jeremiah 29:23, this is important. Because they have done an outrageous thing in Israel, they have committed adultery with their neighbors' wives, and they have spoken in my name lying words that I did not command them. I am the one who knows, and I am witness, declares Yahweh. One of the huge things back in the day that the prophets consistently hammered in Israel was adultery. I mean, it's deep, people. Proverbs 23:27, for a prostitute is a deep pit, and an adulteress is a narrow well. I'm telling you, even Proverbs tells you, don't go there. Okay? Now, 1 Corinthians 6:15-18. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Messiah? Shall I then take the members of Messiah and make them members of a prostitute? Now think about this on an intellectual level. Like I said, becoming one flesh, joining. Never. Or do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one body with her? Bam! There's that oneness. You know, I mean, you can hate Shaul's writings, but some of this stuff, man, it's so true on, even whether you want to agree with it as scripture or not, I mean, even on a scientific level, I mean, it's making point on. For as it is written, the two will become one flesh, but he who is joined to Yahweh becomes one spirit with him. Flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. You're destroying your own being. 1 Corinthians 7:10-11. To be married I give this charge, not I, but Yahweh. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband should not divorce his wife. Furthermore, if you want to expound on this, and you actually need to look in, I believe it's Deuteronomy, but if a woman is put away, and, if a woman separates from her husband, lies with another man, and comes back to the man, she is not to be rejoined with him, I believe, to be completely on point with that. Not to be remarried again, because that's, I believe it's actually goes on to say is an abomination. I'll try to put the scripture reference to that right there. Jeremiah 3:1. If a man divorces his wife, and she goes from him and becomes another man's wife, will he return to her? Would not the land be greatly polluted? You have played the whore with many lovers, and would you return to me, declares Yahweh? That right there just about goes right on point with what I just said right there. Is, you go and become someone else's spouse, and then, or lover, and then return to it. It's actually just, it's practically about abominable if you think about it. And I guess I'll go with this last verse right here, and then I'll just share a few thoughts with you, and then we'll close on the scripture study. But like I said, there's so much scripture on this, a man could spend days. And I mean, the scripture is very plain. Matthew 19:3-9. And Pharisees came up to him, testing him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? Okay? Any cause, folks. He answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. The beings have become one. So, the DNA, I'm telling you, the lives and the blood, it gets deep, especially on a sexual level. What therefore Elohim has joined together, let not man separate. That also means other people infusing themselves into the marriage to destroy it. Just think about it. I'm telling you, it's very deep. They said to him, "Why then did Moshe command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away?" And obviously, anybody that's read the Scripture knows that the answer to that is because of hardness of the heart. Ladies and gentlemen, don't harden your heart toward your spouse. And don't ever get to the point where that you find yourself in another person's bed, because at the end of the day, and what always has kept me in check, I guess this is what keeps me in check. And don't get me wrong, I've had impure thoughts. I've had to pray about it. I'm not righteous. I'm striving to be there. And, we all are growing on that path. We're trying to do what's right. And pray that I can be counted worthy in your kingdom, as that I pray you can as well. Is that we've got to remember at the end of the day that when two people become one flesh, our DNA, our beings are joined together. It's so much beyond just the physical realm. It's beyond the things that we can even see. Is just as we join ourselves to the Most High, and we're joining ourselves as one. When we go and we join ourselves to other people, people's made the point before. It's like you're taking on their demons. I mean, it's literally your being is being joined to their being. I mean, it's almost like you're becoming that person. I'm not saying you are, but I mean, it's like everything about that person you've just joined. It's just like plugging a wall outlet in. It's just like plugging in the wall outlet. You're just connected to the electricity grid. You've just connected yourself to that person and everything about them. So it goes really deep. And at the end of the day, when you say I do, it needs to be forever. And if you, decide not to be together anymore, then the best advice I can give you is don't be going and looking for another companion. Because that's one of those things when you say at the end of the day, I commit to it, you better be committed for the long haul. There is circumstances where if people pass away, don't be lonely. I don't think anybody should be lonely if at all possible. And if your husband or wife passes away and you see fit you want to marry someone else, Scripture doesn't condemn that. On the other hand, you just for some reason don't like your spouse anymore or want to be with them, then the Scripture is pretty cut and dry on it. Don't get me wrong, there's instances where I understand that people's abused. There's violence, there's a lot of things, and Scripture teaches that the righteous shouldn't be unequally yoked with the unrighteous. On the same note as that, it does. I can't find where it gives license to just go at that point and then, marry another person. With the exception being of that, Messiah says that except for the act of fornication. I mean, if your spouse is, in an adulterous relationship or something like that, then I don't see why, in my personal opinion, that if a person puts another person away from your marriage because they commit an act of adultery and choose to move on with your life, then that's something that you're going to have to take up with them and the Most High. But I hope that Scripture is a help to you. That's a subject that is very intense. It's very deep. It goes on a level of so far beyond just one person. That's two people and one flesh. I mean, it's a deep topic. So I hope this helped to you, and until we see again here at another Scripture discussion, I hope you have a most blessed day in Yahushua's name.